Καλησπέρα. Οι ελληνικές startup είναι εδώ. Thank you everybody for coming tonight, no matter the basketball game. We think we have a special event and you'll enjoy it a lot. We are lucky to have with us two prominent European investors and also a company which has the opportunity to work closely with them. So we'd like to spend the next hour and a half, hearing the story of Incrediblue and how these guys managed to get Sitar from Connect and Carlos from Seedcamp on board. And also have a quite open discussion right after, getting all the speakers on the panel and get to have and to answer to your questions. So let us start with Antonis Fiorakis and George Gatos, co-founders of Incrediblue, who will share with us the story of how they managed to get this round, but also everything in between. So please welcome Antonis and George. It's awakening. Cool. Fine. Thank you, guys.
Okay, great. So thanks for coming. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ που ήρθατε και ελπίζουμε έτσι να έχουμε ένα interactive discussion σήμερα. How many of you know Incrediblue already? Okay, great. So recently we announced our latest round of funding. Along with that, we also announced a product change. So the first slide talk a little bit about what we do, just kind of like to remind you of that and to kind of point out the difference in our business model. So travel so far has mainly been split around things that you can do, well, flights and things that you can do on land itself. Nobody has really touched the sea, which has been the majority of our planet. And if you look at how travel has changed in the last few years, two have been the most important industries that really changed. One was lodging, where the latest travel category that was inserted there was apartments. And the other one is transportation, where companies like Uber really changed the way consumers travel. And Incrediblue actually combines lodging with transportation into one means, which is the boat. And with boating, you can actually be every day at a completely new destination. And you have, while you travel, you have all the comforts of home. So it's a very, very unique experience and a brand new travel category. Now, when we look at boating, it can be catered, which is more like a luxury hotel or a villa, or it can be self-catered, which is more like when you're renting an apartment through Airbnb. And but the most important thing is that people who have tried it say that it has been, the best holiday of their life. And the reason why is because they actually sat back and enjoyed the holiday while they didn't have to do anything. And the reason why they didn't have to do anything was because they have a captain on, navigating the boat. And this is actually the biggest change in the Incrediblue business model. It's that guy. So with every boat you book now with Incrediblue, you always have a captain that we handpick and match make with your crew to navigate the boat for you and to take you to actually craft the itinerary with you and your friends. So this is kind of the update. So we have the latest round of funding that we announced recently. So we'd like to go a little bit through the story of how this thing happened. So it actually started back in 2011, 2012. And George here is a big networker, has been running Open Coffee for Thessaloniki many years. And the first thing we did as a startup is actually go to startup events. So we went from mainly international ones. And the good thing there is that
you get to know people. And the funny thing is that while we were building the product, so we did some product validation, we started doing some investors validation. And we were not a team that we knew each other for many years. Actually, I met Antonios in an open coffee, actually Open Coffee Volos, where he said the idea, and we started working together. But in order to find out if we can actually work together, we started, first of all, building something, but then going around and see what kind of investors, partners, or even boat owners would be able to attract. So it was very funny. The first event we went, it was in Skopje. It was the smallest event we can find in the region. So I was like, okay, I met this cool guy, crazy dude, awesome idea. Let's see how he can, pitch and spread the vision. And after that, we ended up being like in 4 more events during that year, which was kind of, for the people who didn't know us, it was kind of weird because, like, guys, I mean, are you building a product or are you going, from event to event around the globe?
But yeah, what I actually do at events is you build relationships. So we met Sitar, for example, in 2012 in Bucharest, but then we also met in 3 different cities and in 3 different circumstances. So you kind of you build these relationships, and the way you build them is the same way like you build a relationship with a friend. And you build them based upon honesty. And so one of the things we did when we started raising the round is we built 3 documents. And we openly shared those documents with the investors that were considering Incrediblue as a potential investment.
For those of you who don't know how we raised funds, and I mean our fund raising history, it was in 2013. We were one of the 2 first investments, together with Workable, of Open Fund Jeremy. That was announced on February 2013. We got 100,000 euros to actually prove the idea. That took us through 2013. And then we raised €500,000 euros that Open Fund led, and 3 angel investors participated. With that money, we headed through 2014. It was in April 2014 that we started visiting investors, first of all for feedback and listening to their thoughts, and announcing what we're going to do in the season of 2014. And this is when we created the documents Antonios mentioned.
Exactly. So, we had a document that was our dashboard that had the core KPIs and the core metrics of the company. Then we had another document that had the plan for the round that we're planning to raise, so what we're going to do with that money. And then the last one was like a marketing document, which had the core marketing strategy and the core KPIs for marketing. So it was very interesting that the investors could actually see the progress of the company from April until September, when we get to sit down and talk in more detail. So you can't really, if you're based in Athens or in Greece or pretty much anywhere in the world where it's not London or New York or Berlin or San Francisco, you can't really raise a serious round over Skype. You have to be there. You have to be in the area where you plan to raise your round. And that's the first thing we did with George. So once we had the data, then we pretty much spend most of our time, or at least 50% of our time, in the area. And and that's very important because meetings come up just daily. So maybe you meet someone at an event, and then they're interested in your company, and they're like, okay, let's meet tomorrow, and you just tell me a little bit more about Incrediblue. You have to be there, in order to take that meeting, and you have to take every meeting that you can. And the reason is that investors don't always invest. I mean, most of the times they don't invest in your company, not because you're not doing a good job, but maybe because they write bigger checks, maybe because they focus in a very specific industry. But anyhow, they can make you great introductions. Like we had we actually experienced that. We met investors who were like, hey, guys, great idea. I don't do that, but you know what? You should speak with that guy. And he just made an intro over his phone. They give you amazing feedback, and then also then become clients, especially with boats. It's quite often that happens. So, now the important thing about communities is that, especially with the investment community, it's a very small world. So people know, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, you read probably how many VC funds are in London. We thought there are a million, and that business is everything. So we thought like it's a huge market, and then we found out that it's not that big as we expected and hoped that it would be. So it's a very small world, and I mean, if you think Athens is a small world, London would be like pretty much the same, more options. But I mean, the connections between the people, they overlap.
Yeah, and the greatest thing is that when you meet someone, you're like, hey, you know what? I've heard about your company from that guy. You're like, okay, that's cool. So then you get to actually see that you're doing a good job within the community. Now, once you start pitching and once you start meeting people, like we did last September, it's very important to be able to have a story, have a pitch that excites people, and it's very easily shareable. Because the most important thing is that you have to excite the person you're speaking to and give them a story that they can actually transmit to someone else. Maybe it's a principal who has transmitted to a partner, maybe someone who has transmitted to his peers, but the story always has to be very simple and very easily shareable. And the more times you do the pitching and the more times you share the story, the more you learn about it. And sometimes you have to do, you think of something that's kind of important, but you don't have time to do the changes. And we have a story. So the slide you saw, like the first one, when we had the comparison between lodging and transportation, it used to be just lodging. And people didn't really get the story. And then we had this idea just like half an hour before a meeting. And
yeah, we were discussing about it, and we said, you know what, I mean, because everyone, when we launched back in 2012, said the Airbnb for boats. And it was pretty cool, but, 2.5 years later, that was not cool anymore. We were the first, but then there were like 25 companies doing the same thing around the globe. So it lost its edge, plus it had some issues that investors weren't excited. So we were talking about it, and we said, it's not fair to be called like that. I mean, you wouldn't call Uber today Airbnb for cars, right? You wouldn't do that. So we don't want our company to be Airbnb or whatever for boats. We are Incrediblue, right? We want you to understand when you say Incrediblue Holidays, it's going to be an awesome yacht with your captain going to amazing destinations that even if you've been there before, you see it from a completely different angle. So that's the vision. So we realized that, and we were talking about that, and we said, you know what, we are like a cousin or like the kid of these two companies. We cannot be something of something. We're Incrediblue. So he's like, good idea. Let's have Thanos, our designer, put the slide on. I was like, dude, we have this important meeting in 30 minutes. Let's focus on what we're going to discuss.
So yeah, so we actually changed the slide, and then we have the meeting, and then the day later we get feedback that that slide was the one that actually clicked in the head of of that investor, and he said, yeah, that actually makes sense, the combination. So it's very important. And I think that's kind of the last slide, and I put it last because I think it's very important. In every company, once in a while, it's not rare, but it happens. You get your champion, and we didn't really know about that, terminology until we actually saw it happening. And it's very important. It's that person that when you speak to them, their lights kind of become shining, and they really love your product. They become extremely excited about you, and it's that person that's going to transmit your story to their peers or partners. And they're going to be your ambassador, and that's what we call the champion. And whenever you find the champion, it's very, very important to take care of them in a way.
Yeah, it can be an associate of a venture capital fund. It can be the secretary of the partner of the fund, who actually you would talk more with the secretary to arrange the meeting, rather if the meeting goes wrong with the partner. So you build this relationship, trying to find a slot of 10 minutes. Of the partner, and these people get so excited. And remember the slide about the shareable story? This is what you need to deliver to these people. So they will go around and talk, and some of them will say, oh, it will be great, book me a yacht, and then you take it as a joke, but you say, you know what, I'll send you a recommendation or something. So these people get hooked because they get the idea, they love it, and then they want to help you succeed.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it pretty much. So we'd love to hear your questions afterwards in the panel.
Thank you.
So let me now invite Sita from Connect to tell us a few words about her fund, her focus, and how we can reach her. Please, Sita.
Hello. I'm just going to, speak a little bit about Connect Ventures and what we do. And then I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, and we can save those for the panel later. So Connect Ventures is a London-based seed fund. So we're a £21 million fund. It's like 30 million euros at this point. It's just about 30 million euros, I guess. And it's We started in 2012. There's 3 partners, 2 Americans and an Italian, and we invest in companies across Europe. So we've made 22 investments to date, well, 21. The 22nd is closing now. And they're about half are in London, and the other half are all over. So there's one in Stockholm, one in Barcelona, one in Athens, one in Amsterdam, one in Riga. So we are location agnostic. The only constraint is we'd like for them to be in Europe. Right? Our focus is on finding the best founders and companies in Europe. So beyond that, we don't actually have a constraint. We like to invest at the seed stage. So I'd say 90%, maybe 85% of our companies are seed stage, which means we invest either first money in, or we'll invest maybe after they've been through Seedcamp, which Carlos will talk about in a bit, or after Open Fund has invested, or they've raised a small amount of money and they're looking for a check that's maybe 500K pounds, about 700,000 euros. That's sort of the upper limit of what we do. We are intensely focused on companies that focus on user experience. So we look for companies that really, really know how to develop an amazing digital product and also deliver an amazing user experience end to end. So if your company is a purely digital product, so Citymapper, it's not live in Athens, but it's one of our better known investments, is a purely digital company. They do public transport mapping. So if you're in point A in a city and you want to get to point B, they deliver the best way for you to do that via usually mobile. For that, it's purely a digital design problem. For something like Incrediblue, actually the experience starts with booking online, but could also include interaction with customer service and then the actual trip itself. Right? So the user experience is not something that we constrain to just the design of the website or the mobile app, but it's actually a complete end-to-end experience for the consumer or the business user, whatever it is. Other than that, we don't actually have any constraints, which seems like a pretty broad view, but actually, I'd say for every 100 companies I meet, there's about 90 that I can reject in the first 30 seconds, because they simply do not have the same definition of excellent user experience that we do. And we really are looking for people that are committed to delivering the best user experience. That doesn't mean we expect them to be already doing that when we invest. We understand that a lot of delivering a great user experience takes time and resource, but we need to know that the founders are committed to delivering that. And it's actually very quick to assess whether or not founders are focused on that. So beyond that, we don't really have any constraints. So we're big champions of ecosystems across Europe, and we're particularly focused on ecosystems, I think, that are underserved. So similar to Seedcamp, we invest in areas like Berlin and Stockholm and London that are very well served, but also in areas like Amsterdam and Riga and Athens that are really underserved by VCs. Because we find that talent is everywhere, right? And companies start everywhere. They tend to scale in a few places, like London, New York, Berlin, and San Francisco, but they start everywhere. So we just really look for the best founders, and founders that really, really understand the markets they're going after and are committed to delivering a great experience for their users in those markets. And beyond that, we don't really have any constraints to what we can do. So looking forward to meeting some more good Greek founders. Thanks.
All the lights? Yeah. So, final speaker before. Yeah, you can use a microphone if you wish. Shall I?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. So, please welcome Carlos from Seedcamp.
Hello.
Like
Cool. Yeah, I'll change slides. Don't worry about it. Can you leave the lights back on a second? It's really weird. we're going to get up here in a second to get in a panel, and you've heard some of the stories of Incrediblue and Connect, and one of the things that's going to be very helpful for us and also for me to share what Seedcamp does is just to get a feeling for who's in the audience right now. How many of you are entrepreneurs right now? How many of you want to be entrepreneurs? Okay, how many of you have raised funding from some local, not your family, but from some local investor? How many of you are in some form of program, accelerator, incubator, or whatever? Oh, wow, quite a bit. And how many of you have gone internationally to raise money? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so a small group. So, Seedcamp, how many of you have heard of Seedcamp before? Okay, a few of you. Okay, cool. So I don't want to spend too much time on Seedcamp itself because some of you here are already familiar with it, but maybe update you on a couple of things that we do that you might not know. First of all, we're a growing team. So we've been around for 8 years. And when we started off, we were just a team of 2 or 3. And now we're roughly around 10. And the reason why we have a bigger team partially is because one of the things that we realize is that startups need not just support at the point of view of a board level, but also in a lot of just the day-to-day stuff. And when we started off with this vision of helping founders accelerate the growth of their company, which includes exposing them to the know-how of people in a network that we have curated with the best people that we can find, including the likes of George and Sitar, to be able to help them grow. And we need a larger team to be able to curate that more precisely and help you understand what your challenges are so we can match you with the right mentors. But what do we do exactly? Well, as I mentioned, through our mentor network and through our capital and through a lot of the support that we provide in our academy, which I'll talk about in a second, we try to accelerate startups from prototype to IPO. And we do this only for certain kinds of founders, those founders that have the global ambitions to really scale a billion-dollar company. That's what we're looking for. And it doesn't always necessarily mean that it looks that way when we first invest. You know, we can be so early in some ways that it's not always obvious. But we don't have any kind of aversion towards companies that haven't launched product. We don't have a problem with companies that are coming out of geographies that are unpopular. You know, we've been around for 8 years. We've invested, 1/3 of our companies are from Eastern Europe, just to give you a general idea. Obviously, very proud of Incrediblue coming out of Greece, but you know, we've come here several times. We've done Slovenia, Estonia, Latvia, and a lot of other geographies. We've done India, we've done Singapore, we've done Mumbai, and we're actively looking for people who are just really passionate about building a company that's global. Towards the end of my presentation, I'm going to walk you through a series of attributes that we look for in founders and companies so you can more deeply understand what that is. Now, in terms of our successes, some of these names you might know, some of you might not. Ironically, one of the ones that isn't here is one that we have in common with Connect, which was Totems, which was purchased by Stripe recently. We also have a few others that some of you might have heard of, like TransferWise, which is a large currency exchange. And one of the things that you might consider doing if you're moving euros to pounds or when you're traveling, I'm going to avoid the obvious Grexit jokes. But you know, it's a great service to provide you with euro to pound conversion or euro to dollar conversion. We also have additional services that we sold last year, like Compiler, which was an online IDE, GrabCAD, which was a marketplace for AutoCAD. And we want to continue to invest in these kinds of businesses that are global and scale. Now, here's an interesting thing about one of these companies that I just want to share with you. GrabCAD, the founders were from Estonia. And what we'd like to do is back founders who can find scalable ways of growing their companies without taking on the cost basis of some of the Silicon Valley companies. So with GrabCAD, for example, he had a lot of his development team in Estonia, whilst they also had an operation in Boston. And this is increasingly important considering the costs of hiring good talent in, say, the Valley. So of course, we always like it when a company is at the right place, and many times that right place is the Valley at some point, or the US at some point. But in other cases, it's about having a distributed workforce. And we understand that that's the growing nature of international companies these days. And that sometimes means you have an office here, there, and somewhere else. And we're okay with that. In terms of how we invest, so we've invested, as I mentioned, over the last 8 years in about 160 companies. So we've definitely had our fair share of companies that we've seen and mentored and learned a lot of the war stories about what it takes to help a company hit product market fit and getting them funded. Our percentage for getting companies funded is roughly around 90, 91% or thereabouts. That means 91% of our companies receive follow-on funding. Of those, about 30% of them are from US investors, just to give you an idea. And part of what we do in order to help facilitate that is we take our companies twice, we give 2 windows of opportunity per year to take them on a trip to the United States, where we go to the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, New York, Boston, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and they meet platforms, investors, and potential customers. And this entire trip is designed around helping an international company meet the right investors, including the likes of Andreessen, Sequoia, et cetera. And we have a couple of investments with Andreessen that have come from these developed relationships. So this is kind of the stuff that we do. We want to find early stage companies and build them. Now, the way that we also integrate is we integrate with other investors like Connect. Sitar and I are co-investors in Incrediblue, and the next way that we invest is through a co-investment via our seed investment strategy. Last year, we raised a new fund, and that has allowed us to continue to invest in companies not only throughout their lifetime, so not only just the first investment, but over the course of the lifetime of the company, but also come in bigger rounds. And you might be asking yourself, well, why would we do that? Well, first of all, we're not an accelerator per se. We're neither a VC fund per se. We're an acceleration fund. And what that means to us is that we want to take the components that Andreessen Horowitz has to support their portfolio, and we want to offer that portfolio support to a company that is in early stages trying to grow to hit product market fit. So in the case of Incrediblue, we've helped them with obviously connecting them with a lot of the founders that are part of our 160 network, with a lot of the people that we know that help with marketing services, and we also bring with them a founders pack that they can leverage for any kind of hosting costs or accounting costs or even meeting other people that they need to hire. So there's a lot of other services, including the US trip, which in due time will come and they'll take advantage of, but that's what we want to bring to a seed syndicate. And I know there's like 1 or 2 investors in here, and obviously George already knows this, but you know, for those of you that may be investors in the crowd, you know, this is one thing that we increasingly want to do with other investors. And that's we want to do about maybe 10 to 15 investments per year of that sort. Now, to the last point is what we look for. And I think we're going to have a deeper conversation about this in general in the panel. But specifically when it comes to what Seedcamp looks for, how many of you here have applied to Seedcamp in the past, by the way? Okay, 1 or 2. George, you applied? Really? Way back when? Cool. So because of what I mentioned earlier, which is we have our pre-seed and seed, when you apply, when I say, have you applied, it's when your company's applying for Seedcamp to be your lead investor, and we have an application process 4 times a year where you can apply, or if you come to one of our meet and greets, like yesterday where I had the chance to meet some of the companies at a workshop, that's when we can invest in you as a lead investor. If we're doing a syndicate, let's say with Connect, it'll come whenever it comes. And at that point, it's just a chance to see, you know, is your company really scalable? Now, what we look for in both cases, I think the number one thing I should put here really is global ambitions. I think it's less of a problem for markets like Greece and less of a problem for smaller markets. It becomes more of a problem for larger markets, let's say like Poland, Spain, Italy, where there's enough of a market at the local geography level that the ambitions of the founder are to become the market force for that local market. That is not something we're that interested in. We're more interested in taking companies that have global ambitions from the start. And it doesn't matter whether you haven't launched your product per se or you don't have traction, but we want to see that the potential for this is beyond the local market. So that's a key thing. The second, really it should have been the second, but a differentiated product hypothesis. Now, this is more particular to your understanding of your competitors, but how you relate to your competitors in the eye of the customer. And one of the things that we're really picky about is your understanding of your customer. A lot of times we have self-referencing. We think we are the customer, and therefore it creates a problem where you are not fragmenting or you're not segmenting your customer base or your potential customer base well enough to then have efficient customer acquisition strategies. When we have an interview with a founder, we're trying to figure out how much you know your customer, how much do you understand. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't invest in you if you don't have it defined. Because there's a lot of you that might be building something that has no customer yet, hasn't been invented. And that's okay with us. But if you don't have a strategy on how you're going to find that customer, if you don't have a hypothesis as to who that customer is, it makes it a lot less compelling for us because it gives me a feeling that you're not an execution-capable team. You're not a team that has identified the key things that you need to figure out and supplemented your team with the right skills to pull it off. So we're looking for that as a fourth attribute. And the last attribute is we're okay with a lot of unknowns at the pre-seed stage. However, as soon as you start going a little later into the seed stage, we obviously want to see more things. Like, for example, the product has shipped. There is not necessarily traction, but at least I can see that this is a functional product. So this is just a very simple overview of the things that we look for in founders and look for in companies, and I'm more than happy to go into more depth about it in the panel in a second. So thank you.
So thank you, everybody. Let me start with a question to Carlos and Sitar before we follow on with your questions. So what made you click with Incrediblue in the first place?
Oh, we have to, this is like the UN Council.
This is great.
It's like, I'd like to oppose that thought.
Can I go first? So I first met them towards the end of 2012. And they were clearly, this was in Romania, at a conference called How To Web. And did you win that year? Yeah. Yeah. So they pitched extremely well. I mean, they showed basically lots of pictures of boats. So everyone wanted to be on a boat, and we were in Romania, so that, okay, you're in Bucharest, which is like the opposite of an Incrediblue trip. And so I think people really took to it. So, and they were very engaging as presenters. So I spoke to them and looked at the site, and at that point, I think it was basically like you could see pictures of boats, and then you had to call to book a boat. And I thought, okay, it's interesting, but it's not really a product. Like, this is just a website with a bunch of pictures of boats. So all I know so far is that they know people with boats, I think. But then over the next 2 years, I saw, or I guess a year and a half, I saw them progress the product quite a bit. So I met them again in Cologne, and they had built the product where you could actually book on the site, and then met them a few months later, and they had decided that actually boat booking was too small, and they were moving to holidays. So for me, what really attracted to them was I could see how they progressed their thinking as founders, and I could see that they were very capable of executing. That they really, you know, a lot of times you see people, then you see them 6 months later, and they've done almost nothing in 6 months. They haven't really progressed their product, they haven't really progressed their thinking, they haven't actually done very much. And it's always surprising to me how often I see this. Even sometimes within people we back, right? There's very little movement sometimes. And so what we really look for is people that are actually able to build, execute, realize when they're wrong, and you know, course correct, and then move forward again. Because most of the time when you're building something that's a very large vision, you know, you're here, it's here, and there's never a straight path. There's a lot of course correction along the way, and what's really important is to know whether you know how to course correct or whether you get, you know, sidelined or stuck in one spot. So for me, it was really they were highly competent as founders, but they really were good at progressing the product and realizing where the limitations were and going after something potentially much bigger.
How many of you regularly take boating holidays? Okay,
yeah, in Greece.
1, 2, 3. Well, actually, it's a lot lower an amount than I had hoped. But I think, what's that? You don't take holidays. Fair enough. So I had my introduction to a boating holiday in Greece in 2006, and it was ironically a friend that Setar and I share in common, who's a skipper, and he invited me over, and when we went on this holiday, he didn't tell me that he was going to be the skipper, and that was the first sort of heart attack that I had, because he had just gotten his license, and I was like, wow, that is really scary. And over the course of the trip, we had to find different locations to moor, and that was half the enjoyment. Our dinghy was half deflated all the time, so we would inevitably sink as we were trying to get to shore. We were then always trying to figure out what to cook, because as a guy, I only know how to cook eggs and cereal, and that got old after a while. And then we had obviously the idiosyncrasies of getting to know each other very closely. And lastly, we had an engine fire where the belt started getting really hot, and I had to open up the lid, and I figured out that the little thing that was holding this engine together had broken, and luckily we had a spare part. But in spite of all those things, I had the most amazing and memorable time, to the point that I'm telling you this story almost a decade later, right? And I remember every memory of it. Thus, it became the most memorable experience in one of my recent holidays. And when I met Gatos about, was it 3 years ago or so, I know we started talking about some of the projects he had, and then I knew that he was kind of involved in this, and then last year I had the pleasure of being invited to Thessaloniki, where Gatos told me a little bit more about what was going on with Incrediblue, and I was like, look, you should consider this and you should consider that. And one of the things that he told me about was, you know, the evolution of Incrediblue. And for me, the evolution of Incrediblue really had to move away from my friend, and just to make it simple, my friend's name is Sean. It made it easier for Sean to do this because he was a skipper than it would be for me. So I could not relive that moment without Sean. And the moment that I conceptualized that Incrediblue could potentially unlock the 99% of you that did not raise your hand because of whatever reason, I was like, that would be pretty cool. That means I could have that same experience all over again if I could just find a way of making it possible without the fire, without the mooring, without the inflatable dinghy, and run by a professional organization in the way that you don't even think twice about when you order an Uber. Right? And so when I had a chance to meet them, I guess at mid last year, they were going through that transition. And for those of you that were at the meeting that we had yesterday, there was a transition from a very small market, which is the chartered boat market, to a larger potential market that has yet to exist, which is the sort of boating holiday as a service. And that's what really got to me. And we had a very contentious first meeting. I think Antonios hated me for the first 24 hours or maybe a week from when we met. And it was because I really challenged this sort of view. And I think now they've transitioned fully to that. And we're trying to figure out whether it is something we can bring the rest of you to use and try out. And that's ultimately what brought me on board. Now, as I mentioned to you during my presentation, Seedcamp isn't a lead investor in the strict sense. We do that for the pre-seed, but not for the seed. And Sitar, I know, from a long time. We used to work together at a previous fund, and I know that she's a very stickler for product. So having the combination of what I knew I could bring to the table with knowing what Sitar could bring to the table really brought me comfort to make a co-investment around taking this idea of a niche of a chartered boat thing to a boating holiday as a service to the grand scale. And that's kind of how our journey came. And I think, if I'm correct, Antonios doesn't hate me anymore. But other than that, it's amazing.
Okay, shall we now take some questions from you guys? Please. Let me also repeat the question in order to be properly recorded. So the question is, do existing charters like Vernikos, etc., are they competitors to you or not?
So it depends a little bit on the company. So, for example, if they own boats, then they can list them on the platform, and then they're partners. If they do not own boats and they act, as brokers, then that is kind of a competitor. Or let me rephrase that, it used to be a competitor. Because most of these companies, most of the companies that are, like Vernikos, etc., they target the boat charter market, the sailing market, what they call the bareboat market. So somebody, the use case, a client, is someone who has a license of the boat, and he's just going to rent the boat and go on his holiday on his own. We have gone past that. We know this is a small niche market, and we used to serve this, and also the market for people who have, like 99% of the people here have no idea, and they need a good captain to take care of everything. So we're only focusing on that part. So yeah, not really competitors.
Okay, next one, please. Yes.
Hello, my name is Christos, and I would like to ask Sita. You said that you can really find out if the startups are really committed to user experience, and you can do that even if you haven't seen a very good and compelling product, and they are in the pre-seed stage. How you can do that?
I'm sorry, what was the question exactly? How do I know that
that the team is really committed to a great user experience, even if they are in pre-seed, they have a crappy product and...
Yeah, so thing is, what I look for is teams that do as much as they can do at any given point. What I don't like is when I meet a team that says, we will have a good user experience for a digital product, but it's not the most important thing right now. Right? So if you say you have a crap product, then you don't care about user experience. But if you've done as much as you can, that's what I care about, right? So I'll use Incrediblue as an example, right? For the holiday product, they don't yet have an end-to-end experience. They don't have we're going to pick you up from the airport, deliver you, there's like a nice package when you're waiting on the welcome package, and they don't have all of it figured out. But even a year ago, when I looked at the product, what they had was what they could have done, which was a very good digital product. Now, if that had been bad, I wouldn't have thought they really care about user experience, because they're not even doing what they're capable of doing. Does that make sense?
Next one, please.
Hi, I'm Nestor. I just wanted to ask you if you feel that the cost structure of this endeavor will scale, because it looks like the experience you're describing has a huge cost structure. The service that you're planning to give and the people that are involved are going to cost a lot of money. So I just want to ask about the scalability.
Well, it's something that has been going on for many years. I mean, renting boats is probably for 3 decades at least. It's been something that has been happening. It was just available to the very rich or to the people who knew about it as an amazing holiday, which was mainly sailors. Now, the way we package it, it's a new and innovative way where it takes time to handpick the captains and then do the matchmaking. It takes time to find the boats and then have great photography for the boats. It takes time to create content for the destinations, as well as give you ideas of where to go for 3 days or 5-day trips. But there is one thing that is behind everything. It's technology. And technology makes things scalable. And if you have the processes in place, it can be scalable at a cost that is, it's something that you can easily handle.
And just to clarify, we do not own the supply. We don't commit to the supply. We don't have contracts saying, like, we're going to charter 10 weeks for you and we pay in advance or something. So it's on demand. The yachts belong to individual professional owners or charter companies. So technology allows us, even if we rent 1 yacht or 1 million yachts, there are some fixed costs that need to increase and then some variable costs. But other than that, no, I wouldn't say that there is a constraint.
Okay, clear. Please, let's do not make more than one question per participant. So, next one. I'm not seeing very many hands up, by the way, and in that case, I may need to take over. But so, please.
Well, it's a two-sided question. So, about Incrediblue, you mentioned that you were pretty transparent and you try to reach to many investors all over the world. How do you manage that? Is it going to events and try to win competition and media exposure, or just send your pitch deck and all the other info to any VC or any investor you might find the details? And for the investor side, how do you evaluate if someone that you don't really know sends you his proposal, his pitch deck, his value proposition? What are the key points that make it really interesting for you to give them, like, even a Skype call or something?
Yeah, sure. So you asked two questions, one relating to the selection of investors to approach, and I'll let Antonios cover that. And the second one, just to repeat your question, was around what it takes to get our attention. And at Seedcamp, we have two ways of meeting companies. And as I mentioned before, one of them is through applying and one's through a syndicate. Now, the reality of the matter is that the world's not that simple, right? I get emails all the time. I get recommendations from our mentors. I get recommendations from our network. So there are moments where I meet people. And if you look at the way that you probably meet friends and people in a party, there's all sorts of hidden signals that you've curated over the years of experience just being yourself that determine whether somebody is somebody of interest or not. Investors have that same set of criteria. That criteria might be, whenever this person starts presenting, have they addressed all the key things that I think would be relevant for this kind of business? And that's just like looking at a high quality, either elevator pitch, if in person, and knowing the social cues about when to go and when not to. One of the things that we look for are founders that we know are going to have an easier time to raise follow-on funding. So I'm looking at the attributes that I know that when I take them on the US trip at 6-9 months of being in our program, that they're not going to struggle because they're socially awkward or can't, manage to engage those investors or piss them off. So there is a certain limit to that, because obviously not everybody's going to be an extrovert and all that, but I'm aware of what that limit is, and I'm looking for specific parameters in terms of how people socialize, if they just sent me a blank email that clearly shows that they've just copied and pasted across everyone, that again shows absolutely no insight into whether I'm the right fit for them or not. And so you can see that kind of behavior both in the email, the quality of the content, and when in person, how they talk to you, whether they're talking at you or talking with you, or whether they understand where you sit in the ecosystem, and therefore they're having a dialogue with you so that you're like, actually, this is pretty interesting. This guy's got it on. He's got it figured out. And that dialogue, you realize, could transplant itself into a dialogue for the Series B, Series C onwards.
So I'll also answer the second question. So we have a few different sources for how we initially meet founders. The biggest is referrals. So it's people we know founders, right? And those people we know are either downstream venture funds, so A, B, C round funds, where they meet a company, they think it's interesting, the company's raising less than what they're willing to do, but they think it might be interesting for us, and they have a good idea of what we're interested in. And that last bit is very important, right? I look for a referral from someone who's actually filtering referrals and not just sending me every crap seed company that they see. And generally, the investors that I know, in London in particular, and like, for example, with George from Open Fund, they know what I'm looking for, and so they know that we're looking for product and UX-focused people, and they send those to me. Other referrals come from entrepreneurs that we've backed or entrepreneurs that we know. This is a really, really strong signal, right? So entrepreneurs we know, they think this person's a potentially good founder. I will always take that meeting. And it's not always true that I agree that the person's a good founder, but I will always take the meeting if one of our founders thinks this person is good, or they were, if I get oftentimes, I went to school with this person and like, if we could have done a company together, we would have. That to me is a really, really strong signal. So referrals are your best bet. So if you know someone that knows me and they think you're high quality, we'll probably meet. After that, it varies a lot. And I think it's not like a step down, it's like a very big step down in terms of probability, because the volume becomes huge, right? So I go to a conference, and one of the biggest problems is, so this is actually not too bad, but if I go to a conference like How To Web and I talk, immediately afterwards, there's 30 people. And it's like the worst possible time to try to pitch me, because there's 30 people all trying to pitch me at the same time.
But not right now, like you will be around here, so people can come.
Yeah, no, but this is good, and this is actually quite small, right?
Yeah.
So this is like, and you have a very good idea of what it is that I'm looking for, so I expect you to self-filter, right? But you know, conferences it's sort of undifferentiated, and you've got 30 seconds to speak. It's not really a good time, but that is one, and that is how I initially met the Incrediblue guys. It took 2 years to get to an investment there, right? Because at that time they weren't ready, but it was interesting enough for me to be interested in them and tracking them. Email, like just email in, but for this I have to repeat what Carlos said, which is it's really easy to tell when you've just copy-pasted an email in and you have put no effort into actually looking at our portfolio, what we care about, what we think about, and it's really, really easy to figure out what we care about and what we think about, right? We have, the first thing you see on our website is that we're product focused. It's not that hard, right? So, when I get an email that's clearly like a copy-paste email, I think, okay, if you're not gonna put effort in, I'm not gonna put effort in, and I don't reply. I don't even bother saying no, I just don't reply. So we do look at cold emails. You know, I read most cold emails that I get, but I do expect the person to have put some effort in. And even then, most likely the answer is no, because the first thing I do is I go and look at the product. And if I don't think the product is compelling, that's probably where the point will end.
Next one.
From a founder's perspective, we didn't give access to all the investors in that document, all the investors we met. So, and then you don't just go pitching investors all around the world. So we were only focused in London, because we knew, for example, we knew we wanted to raise funding in Europe, and we couldn't do it, for example, in Berlin, which is the other hub. So it made sense for us to focus in London, and then you see with which investors you have a good fit, and then you kind of keep them up to date, and the document is a very good way to keep them up to date all the time, and then it kind of builds up their relationship.
So in more practical terms, actually, I guess you set up a list of investors who might be relevant in terms of their previous investments.
Yeah, and then
you try to get an introduction to them. And
yeah, the introduction is the best way to do it. And then you have a first meeting, maybe you get some advice, some feedback. Then you build upon that, and you evolve your business. And as the time goes by, you are better and better, and in order to be able to get an investment. And this is part of the job of a founder. I mean, it's not what you do only, but it's a very big part, at least of one member of your team. It has to be a core part of it for some time. And as Sita told me once, you always fundraise. So you have to meet people all the time. It's maybe you meet them now, and maybe a year later, it's you're gonna have an investment with them. So
next question, please. Yeah, and George, thank you for facilitating this stuff.
Hi. I'd like to ask you, what do you think of crowded markets? I mean, it's obviously a great thing to have to see a great product that is in a market with no competition. But what do you think, or what would it take for you to invest in a market that there's a lot of competition?
I actually have to say, I think when you see a product where there's no competition, one of my first questions is, why not? Because it usually is a terrible idea. Like, actually products with no competition tend to be really terrible. Very rarely is it nearly as advanced and bleeding edge as the founder thinks it is. Most of the time it's because it's fucking terrible. So I expect there to be competition. And whenever I ask founders, so who do you compete with? And they say no one, I just think they don't know their market. That's my automatic, you're either lying to yourself or you're lying to me. Or you don't know. None of those are good, right? So I expect there to be competition. What we believe very deeply in is that delivering an amazing user experience is actually something very, very, very few companies deliver on. Actually, it's something very few companies care about. particularly in some industries like education. When's the last time you saw like a really amazing user? I mean, it's school is like the default user experience, and it's pretty terrible, right? So there's a lot to be said for can you deliver an amazing user experience, and it's a very strong differentiator. So Citymapper is one of the first investments we made, and their competition was Google Maps and Apple Maps, right? So it's like pretty like big 800-pound gorilla competition. The thing is, in neither of those cases did they really care about the user experience of intra-city planning, right? Like, how do I get from point A to point B? They were maps products, not transport planning products. And there's a very different user experience that you need to design if your focus is on transport planning. And we knew that. And that was the founder's pitch as well. And so for us, that was great. Like, there's a clear differentiator in terms of what you're trying to achieve versus your competitors.
So there's another way of thinking about the process of entering or disrupting a crowded market. Like, you look at the banking industry, or you look at the financial services industry. By all definitions, it's crowded. You know, there's tons of people playing in this space. The problem is that, in spite of the fact that that market is monopolized in the way that Google Maps and Apple Maps had monopolized transport, you have one of two choices. You either, if it's like a very sophisticated, relatively digitized industry, you're going to have to take a niche and position yourself vis-a-vis all these other people with something that is quite unique, enough so that big players will use you for that service because you'll be so much better than whatever it is that they have built into their stock software or whatever. Then there's an alternative, which is take the financial industry, and the reason why there's so much heat around the fintech space, it's because, yes, it's a crowded market in the sense that all those services are already available in some way, shape, or form, but they are crap. Right? And so what you're doing is you're coming in with something fresh, some new variant of it, either a cheaper, faster, less hurdles, like think about banking services or checking account services. In the UK, it's almost impossible to open up a bank account. Well, what if you could make it a lot faster? Well, how about payments abroad? A lot of these things are things that new entrants can come in spite of the fact that there's a crowded market space, because they've positioned themselves as something very unique and differentiated in terms of speed or service or experience. To use Sitar's example, but phrased slightly differently, would be Citymapper positioned itself as the only app that really does a good job of taking you through all the different public transport options in a way that neither Google Maps or Apple Maps did. And so you need to be able to do that when you're pitching an investor. Otherwise, I don't see. And that was like in my list of things I look for. That's like number two or number one that I had there about things I look for, because by definition, everything is almost always a crowded market.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you very specific thing. We've always known Incrediblue as a service that is like, as we said, an Airbnb for boats and everything. We would like some insights. I mean, it's a question addressed to any one of you. I mean, I know that you've put a lot of effort, the team and everyone, on evolving the project and doing new things. But it's like, we don't know what have you done. I mean, you said that it's very important for investors to meet a startup and, let's say, 6 months later or 1 year later to realize that they've put a lot of effort based on the feedback they got and everything. Could you give us a little, more insights? What have you changed so far?
In terms of product, or?
Just like anything in terms of, let's say, marketing. What have you changed based on the feedback that you got from all this and networks and pitching and everything?
As you grow as a company, so we've been around since 2012. So year one, we had some traction. Year two, that traction grew maybe, sales, for example, by 6 times, fleet by, I don't know, from 100 to 3,000 boats. I don't know how big that is. But, it shows traction. And then I think the biggest thing that we identified was the potential to go to a much bigger market than the one we had initially started with. And we had the data to prove that. So we had 45% of our customers doing holidays on a boat for the very first time. Now, this piece of data kind of proved the vision that we had as founders when we started, that we don't want to create an easier way to rent a boat. Until now, Incrediblue was just a digital product. So it was a booking platform. So, we would generate leads for the boat owners. They would come on the platform. They would send an inquiry to the owner. Then if that was confirmed, they would book online, and that was kind of the end. So we were like purely digital. Now we're also like a physical product, so we take care of your experience on, over there, and also a human product, because we take care of the captain. So it was kind of, it's not, you can't really visualize it at the moment, but as an experience, it's a lot longer and a lot more curated. So, yeah.
Thank you. Next one, please. Okay. Stavros.
You gotta get on that side. There's like a lot of people over there.
Screen, okay. Guys,
oh, hi.
I'd like your opinion on the value of a start going through a program or through an accelerator versus not going through.
That's crap. You should never go through an accelerator. It's just...
Whether it's talent either there or it's not, or can talent actually be built upon through programs?
So the question is, what's the value of going through an accelerator? And I guess it applies
Let me
to
go, because I think Carlos is a bit biased on this one, so I'll start. I actually think there's a lot of value in going through an accelerator for a few different reasons. So I've recommended actually a few founders that I've eventually backed actually go through accelerators, because I think they're very good training. Like one of the things that I know Carlos and Reshma do is they train the founders really well, not just for fundraising, but that is like a big part of being a founder of a venture-backed startup. Not just for that, but also just for actually going from being a couple of people with an idea to really starting a company and starting what you do when you start a company is you go from being a founder to eventually becoming a manager. Right? It's just every successful company, every successful founder needs to make that transition, or you don't succeed. Like you don't last. The company may go on, but you don't as a founder. And that training, the earlier it starts, the better off you are. And I think really, really good accelerators do that. Right? They give you sort of this basic tool set that you can use to navigate, hiring people, setting your product strategy, your fundraising strategy. I don't know what are some of the other, your marketing strategy, like a lot of the different aspects that you have to do that are beyond just, okay, we built an MVP. Because really anyone can build an MVP. That's not a company, that's a product. And so you have to go from the product to the company stage. And I think a lot of accelerators do that. And like another company that we've backed, it's a coffee company in London, it's called Packed Coffee. Prior to doing Packed, the founder Stephen had a co-founder Dan, and they went through Seedcamp with their other company, and I had met Stephen actually through a cold email that he sent me, and I thought, okay, they were very good founders, they were very competent, they knew nothing about fundraising, they knew nothing about building a technology company, they knew nothing about hiring. I mean, it was two of them in a rotating cast of interns. They really didn't know anything. They were just clearly very, they had a lot of potential and a lot of talent. They really needed to be shaped into being startup founders. And so I recommended that they go to Seedcamp, and what came out of the other end of that was infinitely more fundable than what went in.
So an interesting thing for you guys to consider, because probably many of you are considering this idea of being part of a program. So if you look at venture funds, and you look at, for example, Connect. So Sitar, I've seen her work with companies on the side of product. Now, she brings two levels of credibility. One is her personal credibility, which is as soon as she spends time with you and you listen to her feedback, you think, shit, this is really useful. Like, this is stuff I hadn't heard before. And this is really helpful for me, and this person is not telling me what to do, but is providing me with the feedback to do so. That's the first half. And the second half is, oh, she's got money to back me in a way that is actually according to market, in a way that also means she had to be vetted by somebody. Now, the problem with accelerators, increasingly, is that the bar to entry is very low. In some cases, non-existent, because it's very easy for somebody to say, okay, I have some abandoned space, I'm gonna call myself an accelerator, and I'm going to let you camp out here, or an incubator or whatever, and without having those two layers of validation. And so one of the challenges you as founders have to do is, obviously I can sit here and say, hey, apply to Seedcamp, apply to Seedcamp, but there's other programs too. But it's more about you, I think with the size of an investment fund that qualifies as a seed fund, some other group of people, professional investors, vetted those fund managers. You need to do the same for accelerators or incubators in a way that other capital does not, because they don't need to necessarily. So I would be wary of just any old program, but there definitely is a benefit, and of course I'm biased when I say that. That's why I'm more keen on you guys making the right choice.
Yeah. The key is in the name, right? An accelerator should accelerate you in some way, and I'm always shocked at the number of companies I see that come out of certain accelerators that have made zero progress. Not just in their company, but actually in their thinking. Like, I meet with them at the beginning and I meet with them in the end, and they seem to have learned literally nothing. And in fact, even regressed a bit. And so when you look at accelerators, you should really look at it and see, not just, a lot of people focus on like how many people fundraise. It's a proxy for, you know, did the 3 or 6 months help me skip another 6 months? So did I do in 3 or 6 months what it would have taken me a year to do otherwise, right? Because the most important commodity you have is your time. If you're an extremely good founder, it's like, it's infinitely more valuable than money. So the faster you get your company going, the better off you are.
So another thing, because there might be a question coming up about raising international capital. And so maybe one addendum to this question that I can make for a lot of you that might be asking yourself this question is, if you're starting a company in Greece, how do you get foreign investors interested in your company? Well, one of the ways, obviously, is through these kinds of informal gatherings. You know, we have to thank George for holding them, and then inevitably you're going to have more investors coming from abroad for these kinds of things. You can hold your own meetups for different sectors and invite people. That's all great, all the grassroots stuff. But one of the core jobs of capable programs like the top accelerators is to allow companies that generally would have struggled in raising locally to have access to that international pool. So that is the first call of capital that is not discriminatory in the sense that they're not necessarily sitting somewhere and saying, you come to me. You know, that's why, for example, we come and we hold events here and we meet companies. And there are other programs that do that too. So I encourage you, if you're looking for the first round of capital, apply to a program that allows you to be able to scale originally here, but then potentially start scaling abroad, London, and in the Valley.
Next question, please. Ah, the gentleman there, yeah, you.
So I've been working in Lean for several years now, and I've heard you use terms that to me sound like...
Can you repeat, please?
Sorry, thanks. So I've been working in, you can hear me. I've been working in Lean for several years now, and each of you have used words like sound like you are familiar with Lean. Course correction, hypothesis, pivoting. So, and you've talked about the value of accelerators in improving learning. So I'm just interested in whether you have recommended the people you invest in, use Lean as a way to accelerate their learning. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a very good question. How many of you have not read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup? Okay, 1 or 2. You guys are brave. Thanks for raising your hand. Okay. I think that there is, as with, one of the things that I see a lot, because I see a lot of companies coming through our program, I kind of get a feeling for what becomes common knowledge. And, if I've reversed 3 or 4 years, it was not common knowledge. Now it's known knowledge, meaning everyone approaches it having already understood the core concepts of Lean. The problem is, how do you evolve beyond that? So, for example, I see a lot of companies that understand the core concepts of Lean, but don't apply them outside of just product development. So one of the core concepts is, well, oh crap, if I'm building, measuring, and learning, why am I not doing that across marketing functions, hiring functions, and other things, right? And so part of what we were talking earlier about finding programs or investors that know their shit is making sure that they can test you, or rather they can challenge you in your thinking about something, so that it is rigid and has high fidelity, that you've really thought through any one of these things that you're doing, whether you're marketing, you're hiring, all these things, according to a build, measure, learn process.
I have nothing to add. That was good. Well done.
Next one, please. Gentleman in the back, yeah.
And how much would you ask as a percentage, the running of the company? Who has it?
I thought that was for Antonius. You said as a
It's
start.
both of you, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh, for
I mean, look, it's a big, I'm going to take your question, I'm going to blow it up to the actual question, like valuation, really. What's it comes down to, right?
And control.
And control. So first of all, let's separate. The first thing that you guys can do to educate yourselves is get comfortable with those two things with the resources that are online. I'll give a couple of resources for you that are not familiar with it, so if you want to write these down. One of them for US documents is Series Seed. One of them for European documents is seedsummit.org, and they're across different geographies. There's also Y Combinator is Safe, and then there's Convertible Equity, and there's a couple of other types of documents, NVCA, BVCA, and EVCA documents that you can download. That's for the governance, and that's stuff that just you get familiar with them so you have a view as to what's normal and what isn't. But let's switch back to what is more traditional in terms of valuation. AngelList has something that's useful for you to start thinking about this in that they track what valuations have been for different rounds. Now the problem is that they average things out. So of course you see the number of rounds in Europe and they give you a number of what the average valuations are, but what we don't know is the stage. So, but the reason I'm using that as an example is because valuations are tricky because they're a function of a couple of things. One of them is they're a function of the market conditions. So today, one could argue that we're increasingly in a bubble, right? So increasingly in a bubble is particularly in California where you see some valuations that are really high. Now, why is that enabled? Because there's a series of companies that are raising billion-dollar valuations which raise the overall expectations of investors, and therefore there's more of an appetite towards larger and larger valuations at the lower end of things because you can make the money up on the higher end of things. So that means that over the course of a period of time, you are going to be either affected by the market conditions or victim to them. So if you're fundraising today, your valuations are going to be better than they were during the economic downturn of 2008. So that's the first thing. Valuations are not static. Don't think that whatever it is that somebody raised 3 years ago that happens to be your competitor is going to apply to you today. It won't. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to understand the sort of the range of things that can affect some investors' desire to take equity. If a round is heavily competed, it will naturally mean that you get more leverage as a founder over the investors, which means that you can probably get away with a lot lower equity percentage than if the investor is the only one. We just had one of our companies lose 2 of the potential investors in their round in Poland, and that meant that the only investor that they were able to get was one that was offering 40% of their company, right? Because that was the only money on the table, right? We had another company who had such a crazy round that they were able to get a big check for, in the teens in terms of valuation, in terms of dilution. So that just comes to show how much different variables, market conditions, how competitive your round is, and all these variables, we're not even talking about the attributes of your company. So we're not even starting to talk about whether you have traction or not. This is, of course, the hotness of your company will affect, the traction of your company will affect the hotness, but sometimes it's hot because the founders are great. They have a history. So I've answered your question through a series of triangulation points, and at the end of the day, it comes to a very specific company situation. So for me to give you a generic answer, well, if you're this number of users, you're this valuation, you're this number, it's too hard to do. It's too hard to do, but hopefully I've given you at least some of the variables that make up that amount. And with AngelList as a benchmark, you can start getting a feeling for what is at least within the parameters of normal for pre-seed, seed, Series A, and whatnot.
And,
Carlos, just to add to this question, is there a standard Seedcamp deal, at least in the pre-seed stage? Can you share a range for that?
So for the Seedcamp pre-seed process, so for example, for the seed process, and Sitar, I guess you'll share kind of like with regards to rounds that she leads, at Seedcamp, we're just kind of basically just jump into that round. I don't have no say whatsoever in the valuations, whatever Sitar sets. For the pre-seed, remember that we're investing in companies that sometimes don't even have product. And so as a way of just circumventing that whole discussion about, well, your fictitious product, how does it scale to this fictitious product?
We've just come up with a standard set of terms, and that is, on our website, it shows 25 for 5, and we have other options as well, depending on what the company's cash needs are. But effectively, that means that the company that's going in for a pre-seed is worth about 500K. And that's the same that we've had over the course of the last 8 years. Now, we do scale up that amount, so it obviously affects the valuation. But generally speaking, our standard approach is 25 for 5% of the company. And if you look at a lot of other programs for pre-seed, they generally have a standardized deal.
So for seed, I'm not going to get into specifics because it really depends on a lot of the factors that Carlos said. The one thing I'll say is, in terms of the amount of dilution, I think a lot of it depends on the market you're in. Like in London, you would rarely see any reputable firm take more than 25% in a round. I mean, that's just not done. And it's because those, like, we know that there's going to be 3 or 4 funding rounds down the road if you're super successful. And for us, the most important thing is making sure that the founder is motivated long term. And I think, you know, all really good investors understand that that is of critical importance to building long-term value. So if you take 40% in the first round and you've got 2 founders, they're down to, you know, 30% each, and they haven't really started yet, right? They've just raised a few $100,000. So we don't do things like that. When we avoid, and this is actually where it becomes important, we avoid companies where that's happened to them. So one of the most frustrating things is when I look at a company that's super compelling, and then I look at their cap table, and they've given away half their cap table and raised 300,000 euros so far, right? They've given away 50% of their company, like, and they haven't done much for it. And I just think, okay, they're now raising another $1 million, and there's at least 2 more rounds after that, probably. Like, it's not fundable. It's completely unfundable. So unless they go back to their investors and restructure the cap table, which is a very hard thing to do, I recognize that, we will not be investors in that company, because what we like to do is invest early and then work with the company long term to build a very big company at the end of it. If the founder wants to exit before then, that's fine. What we don't want is for the founder to quit because they're not really motivated anymore because they own 1% of the company after 3 rounds. And so I'd say, you know, and in some markets, like Poland, that is unfortunately the case, that you have investors that don't think along those lines. And it is really unfortunate. But the way we work is 15 to 25% is our range. And that's a pretty big range when you think about dilution. And, you know, the rounds we do are 300,000 up to the largest seed round we've been involved in was £2 million, which is like, you can call it whatever you want. It's $3 million. It's a big round for a company that has 4 people. But it was super competitive. And it's a very compelling company. And that company raised £2 million for like 20%. Whereas another company that, you know, has in some ways progressed more, but is not in as hot a market, can raise 500,000 for 20%. And you can spend a lot of time being frustrated about it, or you can just get on with your life. And I encourage you to just get on with your life, because there's really nothing you're going to be able to do about it, other than become one of the really compelling companies. Like your best strategy is to go heads down and build. Always. Like your best strategy is to just be a really compelling startup, right? So build a product, market it well, have customers, have revenue. It's really hard to say no to companies that are like that in attractive markets.
So I want to touch upon something Sitar said, which I've seen, and unfortunately, this is always really sort of challenging to deal with. I was speaking to a company from Portugal who had raised 150K euros for 60% of their company. And you guys laugh, but you know, the thing is that this was the only choice he had, right? And think about, put yourself in the shoes.
And I know credit cards, man. Holy shit.
I know some of you in Greece probably have had conversations with investors who want, you know, a large portion of your company, and you could sit there and argue with them, which is a bit of a challenge. Because sometimes the people who are making those kinds of deals are coming from an industry where it's either private equity or real estate or something where they're qualified investors in one capacity but not in a venture high-risk capacity, and it's almost a futile conversation to have. So there's a couple of things to consider here. First of all, one of the best things that you can do is help people like George and Gatos to organize events where you can educate the angel community, the investor community about what it's like, because the biggest thing that can help you to some extent is education. And education for the investors allows them also to meet other investors who can co-syndicate with them and understand some of the things here. Now, Sitar mentioned that one of the best things you can do is lock yourself down to some extent in product and build something that's really compelling. And if you've only left with one option or two options locally to raise money, and it is not great, you have to ask yourself the question, do I want to fight to live another day if I believe I can really, truly accomplish something? And we were having a debate, it was like 2 days ago, about whether a company should just pack up their bags and go home or continue. One of our companies that sold for in north of 20 million was a company where the founder basically went broke and he moved in back with his mom, but he kept on building the product, and then it came out from negative back around. It was a rent mine online. And one of the challenges you need to ask yourself as you're contemplating taking this capital from a local investor at a sort of somewhat aggressive valuation is, do I want to fight through this? Is this money enough to get me to the other end of something amazing so that in spite of having taken this hit, I can raise my next round from an international investor with a real good footing? And that's okay. And so when we tried to help this founder raise this money, the product just wasn't there. But we invested in another founder where through collaboration with the local investor, some education, we brought down the total cap table from 40% from the initial investor for about 100K down to 30%. And the company and the founders have fought to live another day. They're now growing really well, building an amazing product, and hopefully we'll be able to raise their next round from a Series A investor. And maybe down the road they get issued some sort of compensation warrant or whatever to further increase their holding. So you just need to make that decision. It's like, at the end of the day, do I want to fight to live another day? And is this money enough to really get me to the point where after I burn it, I can raise from a qualified investor outside of my local geography?
I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. Please, Dimitri.
Okay, I'm going to combine some of the answers you gave to more of my question. So you said you want to find the founders/gems around the world, correct? So again, you won't invest in a company that is crippled, that will die in 1,000 slashes. And the question is, when a founder or a founder's team comes to you with, say, a very good product, and you see the founding team is very sterile, very good, and there is an equally good, or say, 0.75 good UK-based company, right? So what do you say? You say, oh, hey, these are the guys from Greece or Portugal or wherever that are 1-point-something% better than the UK company, but they're a bit, beaten from their local investors. So what would you choose to, okay, I think it morphed into something terrible here. So let me just simple it down. There is a very good company from Greece and a very decent company from the UK. And the company from Greece is a bit crippled. So do you choose to invest now that is a bit crippled? Or do you wait to see if they can make something very good and then come to you later?
Define crippled. I mean, crippled like by their cap table, or or emotionally crippled.
Like you said.
No, I joke,
right,
but actually,
sorry.
like sometimes people are like they're exhausted.
Yeah.
You're exhausted by having to deal with.
No. The letter won't work. I mean, the cap table is like in the 60% or 50% or 40%.
Yeah.
So do you say, okay, I will take a chance on them, or do they have to have a magnitude of talent better than a local company?
It's not really vis-a-vis the local company. I mean, it's not like I don't have to make an investment at all. I don't have to invest, right? Like, it's not like I'm compelled to invest in this area, so I'm going to invest in the UK company or the Greek company. I'm looking for great investments, period. And there's no like, I'm looking for a great investment in video, so I'm going to make an investment in video and I'll find a company somewhere that's doing that. We're looking for just great investments, and we don't really have a remit other than like, we don't do semiconductor, we don't do health tech, we don't do like biotechnology or whatever. But other than that, we don't really have a remit. So it's whatever we really think is the most compelling. But like for us, a crippled cap table is really bad. Because we know that like, there's going to be if you've already given away 60%, and then there's another 20% round, which is what we're doing. Well, first of all, your investor is probably a dick, which means I have to deal with your crappy investor. And they own significantly more than I do, so they basically control the company. And I don't really like investing in companies where there is a controlling shareholder who I don't think is a very good actor. Right? I want to invest in a good shareholder. I want to invest alongside good shareholders because companies go through a lot, right? And most of it is bad. And you have to get through it together. And if you have a shareholder base that doesn't get along, that makes your job as the founder even more difficult. And I recognize that. So maybe the person took 50, 60% because they just didn't know any better. And now they're willing to restructure. And in that case, I can work with that person to say, okay, let's bring it down, but we're going to bring it down to like 10%, right? And if they're willing to do that, then we can work together. But if they're not willing to do that, then they are not really thinking along the same lines I am. And for me, alignment with the founders is critical. So if the shareholder base isn't aligned with the founders, it's never going to work. Like, I mean, it might work, but it's never going to work. And in like Carlos's example, like, okay, 20 million it's a good outcome for the founder, that's fine. That's not what I do it for. Right? I'm a VC. I'm looking for big exits. They don't need to be billion-dollar exits. I don't care about like a specific number. But a 20 million exit, you hopefully don't even need to raise VC for that. That's not really what it's for.
Okay.
That was a good answer. I have nothing to add to that.
Next one, please.
How can we ensure that we have the same set of mind as the VC does? I like very much what Sita said about having to work for a long, long time with the founders. Mm-hmm. So I'm Yannis. I'm working on a pre-market project named Katalava.com, and I understood that, okay, you have your own criteria in order to choose the startup, but the startup should have his own criteria in order to choose you.
Very much.
So I'm asking Incrediblue as well. How do you know that you will work for long years with these people?
I'm going to let Antonio answer because he's been quiet for too long.
Well, I think George can give some feedback as well. I think it's we talked about it, it's like relationships, right? So you can easily, I think you can easily understand if you have a connection with someone. It's very personal. So it's always a little bit, can you work with that person? You can feel it. It's like, would you hire someone that you don't connect well together? Probably not. I think it's quite close, similarly with the investors as well. So it's kind of like your gut feeling and how the first meetings go. Although we thought of it. I don't know, George, what's your thinking?
I don't know. When you meet people, I mean, you don't have an agenda. Oh, I meet an investor. Let's become friends with them. You just, let it go and you discover. I don't know. You build that.
So, Antonius hated me the first time, but then we went for breakfast and then he liked me.
Yeah, but restaurant was more difficult, I think.
I mean, look, what I'm talking about is the ideal scenario, right? What you want to go for is the ideal. But in the end, you're building a business and you do need money. And while you'd like the VC to be aligned long-term with you, in the end, maybe you just want their money. And there's no shame in that at all, right? It's like, you need money to build a business. Yeah, at least some businesses need money before they can really start generating revenue on their own. Very few businesses, by the way, need that. Some do. And so for those, like, you know, you want to have your first round draft pick. You want to have like the best choice possible. But in the end, how much do you want to build a business? And how much are you willing to compromise for that? And it is, you know, there's the fantasy of doing a startup, and then there's the reality of doing a startup. And the reality is you're probably going to have to compromise. You may not get your ideal first-round investor, but maybe it can get you to a position where you can get, for the next round, your ideal investor. You know, maybe you can't get the angel investor you really want, but you can get them involved, you know, later on as you make progress. Or maybe in the end it won't matter, because you have the money and you build and it's really good and you're on a trajectory that people can't really argue with, and you know, everyone sort of does as you wish because you're the one in charge, right? When your things are going really well, founders tend to have a lot of control. The few things I'd encourage you to do is, a lot of alignment, people think is valuation, and it's not. Right? A lot of what comes down to alignment is actually, there's two things founders don't spend enough time doing, I think, with investors. One of which is talking about what it is you actually want to build. Not just for the next 18 months, but, you know, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? What is the vision? What is compelling you to build this company? And I don't think founders spend nearly enough time talking to their investors about that, because I think understanding that motivation for a VC is very important. That's very important for me as a VC. And the other is they focus way too much on a number and not nearly enough on all the terms. And where you get screwed is the terms. You don't get screwed on valuation. Everyone thinks you get screwed on valuation. You don't. You get screwed on terms. Because when things go wrong, and they will always go wrong, it's the terms that will end your company. Right? It's the terms that allow people to take advantage of you. So think less about the score, right, which is the valuation, and think much more about the actual governance of your business. And the best founders I know, they actually read their legals. They hire good lawyers, which is step number one, but they actually read the legals. And the founders I know that are lazy about it, they might hire a good lawyer, they might not, but they don't really look through their legals. And they don't really know what they're signing up to. And then when the shit hits the fan, they're like, well, I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, I didn't know you could fire me as the CEO. Well, you agreed to it. And you don't get the innocence of, well, I didn't know, I don't do this. You're the CEO, you're the founder, it is your job to know. You're taking on investment, and you have to be an adult about it and take responsibility for what you're agreeing to. I think far too many people think too much about the money and the number, the valuation, and not nearly enough about the governance of their company.
I think one thing I want to add there is it can become very easy to get scared of taking capital, because it's almost an investment of your time to educate yourself on all these terms. Like, what Rosita's right, like this is where you can potentially have a pitfall, but at the same time you got to take your time and optimize around product development, not legal training. And so yes, it's true that you will likely have to look at a document at some point. The best way that you can do that, as I mentioned earlier, is familiarize yourself with what's standard, it's not standard. So instead of looking for everything and comprehend everything, you're looking for changes in things away from standard. That's the first point. The second point is, most of the crap that goes wrong is cataclysmic before it hits the legals. The legals just helps you how to clean up the pieces or how to, like, detonate the bomb. But the fact that you've already put the bomb in motion is already bad. And so to your question, to the spirit of your question is around how an investor might be aligned with you. You're going to have to spend a lot of time with that investor, just pinging back and forth, just ideas, as Sitar mentioned, in terms of mindset. You know, is this the kind of investor that's going to want you to liquidate quickly because they want to make a return quickly? Is this a fund that is about to expire in a way, and therefore they want to have a quick return versus they're in it for the long haul? And one of the key things that you can do, and we recommend our founders to do, is to talk to other CEOs of their portfolio. So that you say, hey, I'm working with, Sitar, what is she like? Oh, I'm working with Carlos, what's he like? And then they can give you a view. Usually founders are quite transparent with other founders, no matter who they received money from, because you're all kind of very much a part of a close-knit group. So I definitely encourage you to double check what somebody's saying versus what their portfolio CEOs think of them.
Yeah, this is something that always amazes me. Like, People take investment for us, and sometimes they take references on us, but way too often they don't even ask. And I find that bizarre. Like, you have no idea, actually, what we are like to work with. And you're just gonna jump right into it. And I don't understand that mentality. It doesn't take that much of your time to write an email to, and I will give you the emails of all of our founders. And I tell people that, and very few take us up on it. And I find it a really, really bizarre behavior because you're getting into, it's like one of the biggest decisions you can make with your company is who do you bring on as your shareholder? And I think you really have to think about it as these are my shares and I'm selling them to someone. And who is it that's going to be owning the shares in my company? And if you don't care about who that person is and what they are like to work with, I don't know, I think it's already like the start of potentially of, you know, a very bad path.
And it really defines you and your company as well. So sometimes you might have an offer and you have to reject that offer because you know it's a bad deal. You know, it's a bad addition to, you know, to the shareholders of the company. That's important to have the basis to evaluate that.
Okay, last question. I think up there, yeah, George, I'm always selecting the greatest distance for you.
So you made an excellent point about founders needing to talk with potential VCs about their vision. It's very often the case, though, that companies that don't follow the current fads, that have a vision that's 3-4 years out and are not in the current fad, let's say mobile applications, you know, you have to spin it for the VCs to get interested. So there is a little bit of, you know, the founders needing to dance around their vision often because the VCs have their own vision of where their fund needs to invest. How would you suggest founders sort of resolve that problem?
So the thing is that you're actually jumping ahead here and assuming that all VCs are the same. They're not. So you're taking a sample size and you're applying that across all VCs. I would argue, for example, that Sitar, who you may or may not know, was the first investor that invested in SoundCloud. Everybody had rejected SoundCloud. You know, we were working together at Doughty Hanson before when we were looking at the deal, and everybody had passed on it. So technically, I've just argued against your point. And then all of a sudden, when it turned out that it was a good company, all of a sudden all the other VCs wanted to get into it, right? And for example, with Seedcamp, we've invested in some companies where I just took a thesis that this is going to be interesting. I want to see how this plays out. And it has nothing to do with what's hot. For example, we invested in this company called Crowd Process, which they're still sort of iterating on what their product is doing, but they've effectively taken the idea of a supercomputer, broken it up into bits that are on JavaScript browsers using a banner ad, and are effectively created distributed supercomputing that can be applied to financial problems and all sorts of other scientific and rendering problems. And that's a risk that I took that is completely out of market. But if it becomes true, it makes supercomputing a lot more scalable, so I figured, oh, why not?
Okay. So, last question from myself. Last question from myself. What's your reaction when you hear the term Greek startup?
Souvlaki.
Greek startup. I think that sounds like a very good idea. No, I mean, I think generally in a lot of economies where it's very difficult to start businesses, I actually have a lot of admiration for founders that muddled through all of the bureaucracy and bullshit that you have to deal with, right? In London, it's really easy to start a company. I mean, it's really, really not that hard. It's harder to get a bank account than it is to start a company. It's just not that hard to do, right? So when I meet founders from countries like Romania, where I remember one of my good friends, he's Romanian, and he's like, I was like, why are there's amazing engineers in Romania, right? Why are there so few startups? He said, like, every 10 years, the fundamental political system completely changes. How are you supposed to, like, do a company for the next 10 years when you don't even know what the laws are going to be in 5 years, right? Like, building a company in that kind of environment takes, I think, guts that, you know, it's just really, really hard. And so when I hear Greek startup, I just think, wow, like it's very brave, I think, to start a company in an environment where there's so much uncertainty. I mean, a startup is uncertain enough. right? And then to do it within, and it's one of the things that I always say about the Incrediblue founders is like, I think if you manage to be successful building, and they're just getting started really, but the fact that they've gotten this far even, I think shows a great deal of resolve, because it is much, much harder to start a company here than it is in London. So when I meet a company in London, I've been going for 2 years, really not that impressive, right? A lot of people go for 2 years. But here, that's actually quite a big deal to have managed to keep going for that long in the face of so many unknowns and so much difficulty and a culture that may not necessarily respect your decision to start a company instead of going to work for the government. Or whatever. And so like when I meet startups in like Italy and Portugal and Spain and actually all of Southern Europe, I guess, and a lot of Eastern Europe, I have a lot of admiration. And I actually think founders from there are far more resilient than founders in other places. And the ones that succeed are almost like bulletproof in a way. So I have a underlying thesis about founders from those areas. And I know like Seedcamp has had a ton of success, for example, with Portuguese founders. And Portugal is like a shit economy. Right? I mean, it really is. It's just like, it's not really a great place to, people don't start things in Portugal. Like, you really look for like the safest job you can have. One of my partners is Italian, and when he decided to leave, he was working for like Kraft Foods, and he decided to go and join an ad agency. His parents had a heart attack. Because they were like, there's Kraft, which makes billions and billions and all this stuff, and this ad agency has 3 people and like a table. Like, what are you doing? Right, and so you're not just fighting all of the difficulties in starting a business, you're also fighting culture, which is even harder to fight. And so I actually really like companies that start in those areas, because I think the resolve is one of the most important aspects of founders, and people tend to have it in excess here.
So another thing I wanted to add to what Sitar was saying was, there's stereotypes for countries, right? And those stereotypes play against you and for you. So, stereotype of France. Anybody want to throw some words out? Stereotypes of France? Smoking, what else? Fashion, maybe? What's that?
Cheese.
Cheese, food, okay.
Never hire somebody in France.
Okay, George? The point is that when George asked me a question like, what do you think about when you think of Greek startup? There's 2 ways to look at that question. One of them is, what are the attributes that a founder in Greece has? And from having invested in 160 companies, I meet about 800 companies in person per year because of the events that we run. I can tell you that the DNA of amazing founders does not really vary too much from country to country. The DNA is inherent to the geography. The context in which the company is in can sometimes sort of not help them get further faster, but they're usually the ones that are really good, as Sitar mentioned, rise to the challenge and step out. And therefore, by definition, smaller countries where there isn't a lot of market potential can grow to be one of the best types of founders because they've had to think global from day one. So that's kind of what Sitar mentioned. But there's another element, this is the reason why I was asking the question about France, is that in the world, there's a lot of stereotypes which play in your favor if you take them. And Greece, for example, Incrediblue is a perfect example of that. Tourism in Greece is probably one of the most perfectly aligned things that the world has as a bias in your favor, right? If you're a Greek boating company, I mean, that's just so much more credible than a boating company from Finland, you know? It doesn't matter how great it is. It just generally, when you talk about shipping, what do the Greeks, they know shipping. So I was at this workshop yesterday, and some founder said, what about a logistics company around shipping? I'm like, hell yes, I want it to be a Greek. What the hell, I mean, the Greeks invented the shipping, you know? So to some extent, you have a lot of things in your favor, and you know, it's very easy to sort of get complacent and be like, well, you know, I want to build a product that might be competing against some other people that is big. But there's a lot of opportunities that are inherent in your economy and in your current state that might actually be so much more positively biased in your favor than you might consider.
Currency exchange. Just kidding.
Well, currency exchange, right? Yeah.
Okay, I think this has proven to be a very interesting session. So thank you, Sitar, thank you, Carlos, thank you, Antonios and George, and thanks to everybody for being with us tonight. See you in another open coffee, and we hope that we'll bring more great people just like Sita and Carlos, more great European VCs with us in the near future. Thanks a lot.